Thank you for joining us today for this very special workshop. I didn't sign up for this. When grief takes over the holidays. Today we're fortunate to have Diane Munoz, hospice chaplain with Bluegrass Hospice Care, share her experience and expertise to help us navigate grief in the season of joy. This workshop is sponsored by University of Kentucky Work Life. Diane, thank you for your time today. I'm so glad you're here. Would you like to introduce yourself and get started?
Sure. As she said, I'm Diane Munoz. I have worked for Bluegrass Care Navigators for 20 years. And if I bring a strength to this presentation, it is the amazing accumulation of experiences I've had with patients and family members as caregivers. I went through extensive education to prepare as a chaplain, and I feel very honored to have this role. And I'm still on a journey of learning. And I think for this to be successful today, we're going to mutually share our experiences because my hope is that you feel heard, your questions feel heard, and that you leave feeling encouraged. So with that, let us get going. As Hazel said at the end, if you have any questions related to hospice, the best time to ask questions about hospice is when you don't need to have hospice. So I'd be more than happy to answer those. But we're talking about good grief at the holidays and beyond. And I don't have to tell you, I'm assuming you all are caregivers in one form or fashion. That's already hard work and it can be exhausting. And then you add the holidays and all those expectations, and that can just add to a weight. So, one of the things I wanted us to think about together, um, because it's really important, is how culture affects our beliefs about our caregiving, grieving, and holiday expectations. And that's not something we typically take a step back and think about, but especially when we encounter other cultures, we realize that there's different supports in different cultures and different permissions, if you will, to talk about certain subjects that make it easier or harder, depending on what that culture's rules are. So, um, in talking about the grief that you're carrying as you care for a loved one, and the real elephant in the room, whether it's your caregiving or your own issues, is our mortality. And I don't have to tell you, we live in a culture that is really allergic to talking openly about death and dying. And you didn't sign up for that today, but it is so related that I think if we can really grasp with that, it really has a wonderful spillover into our understanding of our own caregiving. So one of the big elephants is, we just don't talk about it. And I'm curious for you, what has been your experience in trying to talk about death and dying and caregiving? And I wonder what factors have influenced that for you specifically. In the meantime, I'm going to advance. Feel free to respond to the chat. That would be great. Talking openly about death, dying, and our mortality and the challenges, because that is closely related, very closely related to caregiving. Um, and I guess I just want to add here, this is not a high-tech PowerPoint presentation. I'm offering that disclaimer because I really think the value in this time together is sharing experiences. Because if change is inevitable and your experience as a caregiver is changing as you go from month to month and week to week, and we want to be sure to address those concerns. So here's one of the things that we reflect on is um, as we age, we can be tempted to feel less attractive, less desirable. Yet all of us really want to be remembered as that young person, and that's true for the people that you care for as well. And it's so helpful when we can remember that and be curious about who the people we care for were when they were younger. and remembering, sometimes it's easy for me as a chaplain when I'm going into a home, or maybe perhaps for you as a caregiver to think, well, the focus is all on them, and it is, but at some point in time, it's going to be us that's going to be needing the care. And one of the images I like to share is kind of an alien space invader. It's kind of like death and dying in our culture. It's like we really kind of act as though it's an interruption and it's a foreign invader, and that just makes our conversations that much more difficult. And I like to share this slide because obviously, for all of us on this call, we're all mortal, and we all will someday face our own mortality. But one of the challenges in this culture, particularly in the Western culture and American culture, is that we are so focused as a culture on success, whatever, however you define that. And part of success is making more money, having promotions, kind of everything up and to the right. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in a caregiving role and really not sure where that fits into that cultural expectation, as well as just the whole reality of where the future is going with that and people's discomfort in talking about those things. Loss is inevitable, but grief is optional. And I, I find that throughout our culture, I would dare say there is a whole lot of people walking around with unprocessed grief. And one of the things we also want to talk about here today is anticipatory grief. Um, because every day you're seeing changes in your loved one. Maybe not every day. Maybe it's weeks. Maybe it's months. Maybe sometimes you're even kind of not aware of it until somebody comes back into the picture who hasn't seen that loved one for a while. But I think what's really healthy for us as individuals and as families and as a culture is to talk openly about our grief, and the changes we see, and that while it's an honor to be caring for your loved one, it's also really sad when you're seeing a decline in their condition.
Diane, I have a comment in the chat.
Please.
How do I manage, and it sounds like it's perfectly timed, how do I manage the long loss that comes along with dementia? It's one loss after another. It just
It is
compounds.
it is the slow goodbye. And it is one loss after the other. To give a sparkle of hope, um, we often find with our families and our patients with hospice is that the family members who dive in and really care for the loved one, they go through a difficult season of what that anticipatory grief, what you're talking about, the constant wave of, oh my gosh, this is getting worse. Um, but all while your heart and your soul is grieving that loss. And if there is one little bit of encouragement I can give you is that we regularly find that on the other side of their final day, their final breath, people who have entered into the experience all out and have given their all do a whole, I'm thinking my wording here. They do better with their grieving. And by that, I mean you've already done a fair amount of grief. And will you still have grieving to do? Absolutely. Because at that point, you might really have permission to remember who they were before the dementia. But you, by and large, will do much better than other family members who have been arms off. And that's probably a small beacon of hope. But and it is hard, and part of, and we're going to talk about some of this later. What can we do in the meantime to recapture some of those moments so that it's a bit of a lifeline for you as you continue on this long journey? And just to normalize, whether you're talking to your spouse or your friends or your relatives that come in on the holidays, it's like, to say this is really hard. I know it's rewarding, but these are ways that I need you to support and help me. And for most caregivers, that's hard to do because that's why you're the caregiver in the first place. But it is so helpful to yourself and to others for you to relay your experience and especially to also give maybe some thoughts about ways they can help you. And no way is too small.
So we have another comment in the chat.
Please.
No one wants to acknowledge that a family member is no longer with us at the holidays. And if we do, it makes the gathering really sad.
Yes. And we're going to talk about that, some different ways that we can do that. But let me just say here, it's again, that's an elephant in the room, right? And what I would encourage families to do is to think of creative ways to be able to remember that loved one, whether that's a new ornament in the tree. What I've seen some families do is wrap a package under the tree, assuming it's Christmas, or could be Hanukkah too. Wrap a package under the tree with a lid that's removable, and to allow family members to put in there a favorite memory of their loved one or something that they especially miss. And then just let that be a visual reminder if that person's spirit and presence is still with us in the here and now. But we'll talk about some other ideas too as we go. Thank you. I really appreciate these chat. So I'm going to suggest this now, and I'm going to suggest at the end. You are an influencer. We talk about social media influencers, but whenever you're pushing against a cultural norm, which I would submit to you as caregivers, you are, in some ways, stepping outside the norm of our expectations when we're young of what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. You're not only influencing your immediate family, but you're influencing the next generations. You're influencing your friends. You're influencing your coworkers. I know you don't think about that, but I guarantee you are. So I was sharing with Hazel. I don't know if any of you saw on PBS on Monday night, they had a KET special on caregiving. And I found it kind of interesting to listen in and discover that 50% of caregivers still work, which I don't know about you, but that already just makes me more tired. Uh, the average age of a primary caregiver is 49, and the average age of a care recipient is 61. And that surprised me, quite frankly, that it was that young. But wow, that's a lot, right? And this was another thing that hopefully when we get to our questions and answers, we can talk about this. But they made a proclamation that 91% of caregivers have never used respite. And Hazel will be a better source of that information than I. But the area agencies on aging often have availability for respite, which is when you have the ability to pay someone, even if it's 16 hours, to be able to take a break and get some time away for something that's important to you. And we could talk about that some more later too. So part of the challenges with caregiving is the tapes that are playing in your head related to caregiving. Not only are there cultural norms, there could be family norms. Maybe your mom cared for her parents. Maybe your grandmother cared for her parents. Maybe there's quiet expectations. Maybe there's not quiet expectations. Or maybe there's, I promised mom I would never put her in a nursing home. And you're feeling the weight of that even at times when you're not sure you can continue to do this. I'm the eldest, the responsibility falls to me. Uh, Dad only trusts me. I need to be the one to care for him. I wonder what are some of the tapes that are playing in your head that either help or challenge your caregiving. And I'll trust you to put them in the chat as I continue on.
I can tell you mine was my mom didn't want to be a burden. And that was almost her mantra. And she didn't even have dementia, but I understood that. But she had as much uncomfortableness with the caregiving situation because she hated that she needed help
And Hazel, how often do we hear that?
a lot.
A lot.
Mhm.
You know, and it is a reality because we know that if if my daughter's taking care of me and she has to miss a special event because I'm not safe to be left alone, I've cost her something. And those are things that I think, is the more we can talk openly about them, the better. Um, they're challenging to be sure, but I'll often reflect with my patients, and it's something to keep in mind, especially with your loved ones, is that can we imagine your 4 or 5 year old child coming into your room and saying, "Oh, mom, I'm sorry, I'm such a burden that you got to care for me." We don't, because we normalize that there's a dependency at that time. And again, there's a lot of cultural nuances that influence their dependence on us at a later point in their life, but they have learned to be independent. So one of the big let goes is letting go of control and allowing others to care for us. And for most of us, that is very difficult to do. We can help by being grateful, by being thankful, by keeping our sense of humor. But those are really challenging. And we'll talk some more about that. So a big question, especially for those of you who are doing this the long haul, and it is a marathon. And because it's a marathon, you can't be sprinting. You really have to figure out, and the challenge with this is that the figuring never stops. What you're doing now may have to change a month from now, may have to change 6 months from now. And it can be hard to flex when you've got a constant responsibility to care for someone, but it's just the reality that their needs are going to change and your needs are going to change. So, how do we balance the needs of our loved one and your need for self-care, both regularly and especially at the holidays? And I want us to think about, like, so the holidays add an additional burden because there's some cultural expectations around the holidays. And I wonder if you can throw in some of the chat, some of the cultural expectations in the holidays that maybe you find challenging with caregiving. And we'll take a second or two for that to filter in.
So I hear a lot that only mom can do the cooking because she's always done it, but now she's not really capable. So it gets to be very sort of challenging or tricky to figure out how to still engage her, in that situation. But
Yes. So the expectation that we'll have the favorite recipes that mom prepared, and that could be mom's expectation, or it could be your sibling's expectation. Um, so, let's think creatively. Could we creatively challenge, like, okay, who's next to be able to make this? What sibling, what grandchild is can rise to the occasion and start making this? Or um, sometimes using mom's recipe, then the one that has all the smudges on it and the dough on it, and letting somebody else attempt to use that, and if possible, depending where her level of functioning is, to have a grandson or a granddaughter make that with mom present, grandmom present, and the gift of her recipe being there that we're using. Um, and I
I,
think another one. Go ahead, Hazel.
there's another comment in the chat. It says, for me, it's the music. My dad was in the hospital through this season and it was traumatic, and the Christmas songs were the soundtrack for that experience.
Yes. Yes. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's really it it's a wonder how often our memories are associated with music and aromas. And they can really trigger us. And I think, one of the things we're going to talk about is allowing yourself, even though there's a cultural expectation, it's the holidays, so we should all be happy. We should all be glad. And not that you don't have moments of being glad while you're taking care of your loved one, but the reality is the caregiving's still there and it's hard. And I would invite you to listen to those and to really permit yourself a good cathartic cry. And there's a number of reasons for doing that, but one is that research has shown that there are um, toxins in tears of grief that are not in tears of joy. So, you know how there can just be a cathartic release, and you actually, I mean, physiologically feel better after a good cry. I think it's important to let folks know I'm going to cry. And I hope you're okay with that, but I know I feel better. And those tears are visible symbols of how much I've loved the one that I've lost. And that's another aspect of grieving that for most of us, it takes a bit for us to feel comfortable with that. Thank you for
So,
those responses.
yeah, here's one. It can be difficult not to feel guilty about being happy at times. I think guilt is strong.
Yes, yes. And that's where, you know, name it for yourself, maybe journal about it, and especially with your friends and your close loved ones, be honest. It's like, I remember all the memories of when mom did this, and now I'm just remembering that she's not able to do that. And it's really a sad time for me. And it's I'm gonna this is part of my passion. I would suggest to you that it's really important for you to voice those things, not just for yourself, but for the benefit of the people that know and love you. And that's true for kids and grandkids as well as for people, your peers or your spouses. Um, that's the only way we can start making cultural changes if we get honest about the challenges of what we're going through. I'm guessing a lot of you are in the sandwich generation where you may be caring for an elderly loved one, but you might also have 14 and 16 and 20-year-olds at home. And I would imagine one of those challenges, many challenges, is how do you be attentive to their needs for you and wanting to go to their activities, especially here at the holiday time, and yet at the same time, you don't get a free pass to collect go in terms of your care for your loved one. So how do we meet that challenge? But the other thing I would like to throw out there is I have found this with children generally, but particularly if we can be specific about inviting them in to the caregiving process. I mean, obviously there's some things that they can't do. But I have found that when we talk to children in age appropriate ways about what's happening, and particularly empowering them with the gift of their presence and what that means to us and our loved ones, they oftentimes don't know that, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know what to say. And for kids, especially little ones, climbing up in the bed with mom, I mean, can mean the world to mom and to the child. And I have seen many young adults really rise to the occasion in helping care for their loved one. And what's really can be powerful about that is to vocalize to them what a gift that is, not to burden them with it, but that anything that they can do to help you with that is a gift to you, it's a gift to your loved one, and it's really a gift to them. Because again, someday it will be them. And while they won't talk about it, these will be memories that are stored in their heart and soul that I guarantee you will flood back when it either becomes their time to care for you or their own time when someone's going to have to care for them. Another challenge is the role reversal. And no one did tell you about this. Imagine if we lived in a culture where we did talk openly about this and that it was to be anticipated. We'd probably have more resources. But the reason why I raise that is because not every culture is like ours. There are other cultures where the care of loved ones is highly honored and I'm not saying that to guilt anyone, but just imagine the difference it is. And this is why you are an influencer. Like I had a good friend in seminary that he was from the Philippines and he was one of six and his parents were getting elderly. And in that culture, they took turns with mom and dad coming to stay with them for 2 months at a time. I'm not suggesting that any of us can do that, but just imagine that he said and laughed that they fought over who got mom and dad next because it was viewed as an honor. And there are so many cultural and spiritual nuances that go into that. We could spend probably a whole hour talking about that. But that's why I hope if you take nothing else away from today is that you are an influencer. And give yourself permission to remember. Both give yourself permission to grieve and give yourself permission to remember. So maybe one day a month or the days of their birthdays or special events, to pull out those scrapbooks, to pull out the things about them when they were younger. Because as you know, the long-term memory is much more intact than the short-term memory, and it's been eye-opening to me to see how many times when I find out the things about a patient's early history, we're talking the first 15 years of their life, and we go there and live back those places, that they'll, even if they can't contribute, there'll be a bodily response that's positive, or certainly music. Music certainly has a memory somehow in the parts of our brain that's not affected by the plaque of dementia that is just astounding to me. Remember those holidays past and to sit by your loved one and hold their hand and say, Mom, I remember that year that you got me that Chatty Cathy for Christmas. And I just got to tell you, as a little girl, that just thrilled my heart. Your mom may not be able to respond to that, but you need to hear you saying that. And maybe other people that are in your household need to hear you say that as well.
Diane, here's a comment. My sister and I joke about who will get custody of mom when the time comes. Sounds healthy.
Yeah, it is healthy, especially if you can talk about that in front of her. You know, excuse me, my poor daughter's 26. And I've been doing this for the last 20 years. So she knows death and dying and hospice probably more than any 26-year-old should. But I had a laugh even growing up because I just normalized talking about it. And one day I came home and I had been with a number of folks who were demented, but they were happily demented. And I made the comment to her, I said, gee, I hope if I'm demented, I'm happily demented. And without missing a beat, she said, Mom, if you're not, you're going to a nursing home. And we just laughed about it, and so, whatever we can do to normalize. Another time, we had guests over, and I don't make a habit of talking about death and dying, but more times than not, when people find out you work with hospice, one of two things happen. They either avoid the topic or they start telling you about some of their own experiences, which I welcome. And they were sharing about with their kids what their wishes were in terms of burial or cremation. And Kathy was just listening to this as a fifth grader. And the next morning, I'm dropping her off in the drop-off line at elementary school at 7:45 in the morning. And she says to me, so, Mom, do you want to be buried or cremated? And I bust out laughing. I was so relieved that she understood that that was okay to ask. And I realized for a lot of families, it's a long journey to get from that place to a place where you can be comfortable talking about it. But don't be afraid to be creative and step out into the waters of talking about, like, what are your wishes, and which leads into this next thing, discussing advance directives. And I'm sure you've had a variety of experiences. Sometimes it's the parents saying the adult children don't want to talk about it because they don't want to deal with the reality of their parents' death. Sometimes it's the adult children saying, I'm trying to get mom and dad to talk about what their final wishes are, and they won't talk to us. And my we want to learn from each other in the question and answering time. But one thing I find that is really helpful in that is if you have gone ahead and made your own arrangements, it's a great platform to ask others to consider their final wishes. So, to say to mom and dad, I want to be buried. I want to be buried at Wilmore Cemetery. And Kathy knows that, and so she's going to honor my wishes by doing that. And it's really important to me to honor your wishes. But the only way I can know that is if you share those with me. And if they're beyond telling you that, then perhaps, the collective family can discern what would have been their wishes. And we definitely need to talk about that some more. So what can we do? I want to be sure to leave time for questions. Um, you got to slow down and listen to yourself and listen to your loved one. That was one of my what do you call it, resolutions one year, and I need to have it again, is just to slow down. We live in a fast-paced culture, and there's no benefit in us going at breakneck speed. Empathize and remember someday this will be us. It's not a matter of if, but when. And take every opportunity you can to affirm the value and worth of our elders' life experiences, perspectives, what they've survived. I have to share with you that sometimes our World War II veterans, which there aren't many left, but I've been honored to take care of a number of them. And we're talking they're in their mid 90s, and they're so resilient. They survived the Depression. They survived World War II. Many of them survived multiple spouses. And when it comes time to release the process, they just can't do it because they're survivors. And I'm just amazed at the strength and the resilience of that generation. And we like to remind them of that. Never, never, never forget your sense of humor. And that's easier said than done. Also, it's important to get a lot of sleep. And another thing I like to do is when you see a funeral processional, and I'm thankful that here in the state of Kentucky, there basically is a cultural norm of pulling off to the side of the road and taking time to pay respect. But it's also a time to give thanks for your own life and just to remember that someday it will be your family, and that can be helpful. You must slow down. Life will know and celebrate you are part of something much better, bigger than yourself. Delight in being fully present in the moments. Pay attention to what matters most. Keep the main thing, taking care of you and your family and neighbors. And I like to throw this out. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And especially when we're dealing with someone that may have cognitive impairment or dementia, I am convinced their soul and spirit is alive and well inside of them. They're just encapsulated in a body and a brain that's no longer serving them well. But the totality of who they are and the worth of that soul is still alive and well there. And that's not to minimize how hard it is to care for them. But you are an influencer. You are making a difference in the life of your loved one and the life of all who know you, probably more than you realize. And I hope that you're encouraged by that. That PBS show, if you got PBS Passport, it is on there. I went there yesterday and saw that it was already uploaded. It was really helpful. And then if you Google grief at the holiday or caregiving at the holidays, there are so many good resources out there. And give yourself time and permission to do that. Um, at this point, I would like to let's just throw it open to questions, Hazel, and responses.